Good day and welcome to another episode of Skytale Insights. Today we're fortunate enough to host Dr. Ken Winnard, founder, owner of OneLife Health and Performance. Ken is a physician and performance expert who sits at the intersection of longevity, wellness, and optimization, working with high-performing individuals and organizations to extend not just lifespan, but health span. OneLife does this by taking a data-driven, systems-based approach to human performance, blending medicine, diagnostics, and lifestyle strategy. I'm very excited to dig into where wellness, longevity, and modern healthcare are headed. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ken.
Ben, thank you so much for having me. I've been excited about this for a while.
Likewise, and this is such a fun time because this is such an important subject. There's so much interest in it, so much information. I don't know what's true, what's not. It's just relatively new, so it's extremely exciting to get into this topic. I remember, Ken, you and I spoke about a year and a half ago, and you gave me a little bit of your background. And could you share with us again, what problem did you see in traditional medicine, or what opportunities did you see that pushed you toward this type of work? What was the genesis of it?
Definitely. So I am an internal medicine trained physician who, had specialized in hospitalist medicine. So I started in the hospital. And in that setting, it seemed to me that folks didn't really have an idea of how they got there or how they could have prevented getting there when I would interview them. And so I really wanted to help people avoid getting to that place. And so I said, all right, I'm going to leave the hospital. I'll get on the front lines. I'll go to chronic care management, general insurance-based model, and seeing, 20, 30, sometimes 40 patients a day, you really didn't have the time to educate them. And really, insurance was dictating how you practice, the tests you could order, how much time you're spending with the patient. And so I knew if I really wanted to make an impact and to be happy myself in medicine, I was going to need to take a different route. So that led to me opening a concierge practice where it was only cash based. We could kind of practice the way we wanted to practice. But then I still didn't have the tools in my toolbox to prevent disease in folks. And so I started to learn everything I could about lifestyle medicine, functional medicine, nutrition, and hormone replacement, and all the things I knew, needed to be learned to be able to give that comprehensive approach. And so I then took that concierge program, kind of rolled that in, that evolved into a clinic that had a teaching kitchen, a place too where we were going to meal prep for people, and then a training facility, which was kind of like a CrossFit box gym. And the idea was we would cover all the bases where people fail in taking care of themselves. Now that clinic, I might have bit off a little bit more than I could chew, and that was in 2017, kind of before this whole longevity space has exploded. But maybe the demographic wasn't right. I was in Tallahassee, Florida. So I packed that clinic up, moved it down here to South Florida, where I'm from, in Palm Beach. And then that's when we added aesthetics. And that was in 2019. We launched in 2020. And it just kind of took off from there as things have evolved.
Well, that was great vision, and you were years ahead of your time, and here we are, and everyone is, I think, very interested in what you do or trying to do what you're doing now. I always like to start conversations, or really any time that I'm trying to learn something, with a definition. So, you've mentioned longevity, wellness, functional medicine. My world is starting to call it precision healthcare. For the context of this conversation, could you maybe break down what all of these words actually mean? Like, from a high level, what do I expect to learn or know, or what's coming when you hear all of these words?
Definitely. Well, I think the idea of longevity and wanting to live longer, that's been around for a long, long time. But, I think, maybe don't quote me on it, but like 1970s, 1980s, there started to be an idea, around anti-aging and people started talking about anti-aging medicine. That kind of evolved into this age management medicine, which, I think did start to move the needle, but then came lifestyle medicine, in functional medicine, and getting to root cause medicine. Now, in traditional medicine, we've had a subspecialty of preventative medicine, and we do some prevention in traditional care. We do colonoscopies, we do generalized screenings, we do vaccines, but we haven't necessarily focused on extending health span. We're good at helping people live longer now, but those years in good health, we haven't necessarily moved the needle on that. And that's where I think, longevity medicine, that's what it's trying to accomplish.
That's a great
I hope
explanation.
that helps.
It helps a lot.
Yeah.
As you were talking, it reminded me of a book that helped me anyway. I know you know things much deeper, but Peter Attia's Outlive book, it talks about Medicine 2.0 being some, what you said, which is we now live longer, and it's been great for that, but it doesn't. But the last X years of our lives are not spent, very enjoyable as very enjoyable years, whereas before that gap was pretty short. So it sounds like this is maybe tackling that part of it of health span, I believe you call it, which I love, improving that. It's interesting. About a year and a half ago, I read a report by McKinsey, and it talked about the wellness space, the longevity space, how fast it was growing, growing 5 to 10% a year. And from a patient perspective, 82% of consumers say wellness is a top or important priority. And most of that is driven by Gen Z and millennials more than older generations. So you put all these things together and you can definitely see what's about to happen and what is happening in the ramp. What, in your opinion, is driving the surge in wellness and longevity? Like, why now?
It's funny you bring up the book Outlive. The idea of Medicine 3.0, that actually, was first, I think it was Eric Topol, who's a doctor, pretty famous doctor. He wrote a book in 2016 where he described Medicine 3.0. And I think the world at that point just wasn't quite ready for it. So, I think the knowledge, the way to get that knowledge out to people through social media, and then I think COVID really kind of drove it home. I mean, in 2020 now to 24, 25 is where we've just seen this huge acceleration. And we even saw it here in our practice. When we added aesthetics, we thought that would drive traffic into the business early to help us then educate those folks on longevity. And we thought because they're cash paying folks that want to take care of themselves, they want to look good on the outside, they have a right mind for wanting to take care of the inside. And so we thought that it was going to be aesthetics that would drive people in for the health. Well, when COVID hit, we literally just had our grand opening. We put a COVID, we couldn't do any elective procedures or have people come in. So the Dunkin' Donuts here next to us was the only thing that was open. So we stuck a COVID testing sign out there. And when people would call for the COVID test, we'd say, listen, let us run some extra biomarkers on you to see if you have some underlying conditions that may make you more susceptible to have a poor outcome if you catch COVID. And we started diagnosing folks with insulin resistance and low vitamin D deficiency and all of these things and low hormone levels that they were being missed in their traditional care. And that is what drove a lot of that traffic in. And so I think it's just this perfect storm finally coming together to where, we're able to give that level of care and people are now looking for it.
That's great. That makes a lot of sense. And I love what you did during COVID and that book you referenced in 2016. Coincidence right around the time that you opened your practice with this thought. So it seemed both of you were early
Absolutely.
on. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Let's get into it a little bit. I've experienced this. I know people have experienced this that I've talked to. So, I go to my physical every year. I get blood work, a few other things. I get my results back, and, labs are quote unquote normal. But
Yeah,
I and other folks as well, it's like, well, I don't feel the same as I used to. If labs are normal, how does this type of medicine, longevity medicine, how do you think differently about health, risk, trajectory, and helping me feel what I want to consider normal, which is a lot of energy, healthy, et cetera, as I did a decade ago?
absolutely. So, I think in that medicine 2.0 model, we're looking for the big stuff, and we're very reactive in that, right? We're waiting for the hypertension to show up or the high cholesterol, or we even wait till you get so far into the insulin resistance that now you're pre-diabetic or diabetic before we act. I think um, there's a lot of damage that's happening to folks before they show up with that full-blown chronic illness, and that system isn't set up to recognize that ahead of time. And I know when we were talking earlier, our consult's an hour and a half. And if you're going to provide, if you're really going to help move the needle with that person or help them prevent disease or optimize their health so that they feel high energy, they feel the best they can feel day in and day out, you really need to get to know that person. You need to know their habits. You need to know how they're sleeping. You need to know exactly what they're eating, if they're exercising. And that takes a lot of time to get to know that person inside and out. And that's where I think, where if we learn that person well enough, then we could put together the perfect plan that gets to move the needle for them. I think that's where medicine, it's needed to head that way. And whether we like it or not, it's going to head that way because they need it. We have the means now to provide that, and we are. And so that's where I see, this new branch of medicine evolving out of the need, and it's being driven by the consumer, and they're seeking it out. And so they're going outside of that general system to a new system that in real time is being developed right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating evolution. Like, I think about when, certain types of practices or doctors started moving out of hospitals, for example, that provided closer to what you're talking about, more personalized care, a specific clinic, and so forth. Now, this is within a clinic, you're actually treating me as an individual and not when you were explaining what labs look for, which is, well, you're now in this range. It sounds like to me, the way you were describing it, you're almost saying to me, well, you should have done things differently 10 years ago. Now here we are. Whereas what you're doing is 10 years ago, you're starting to treat this so that never shows up in a lab test and the tests that you do. The hour and a half thing just sounded fascinating to me. I was not expecting you to say that. I know I go to doctors and it's like 5 minutes and I'm trying to get a question or two in that I had written down and I'm speaking really fast so I can get it
Absolutely.
in. So I can only imagine what I would learn in an hour and a half. You started getting into this a little bit. Can you walk us through what happens if I go in, I want to be your patient? How do you evaluate? How do you manage a patient over time? What are you looking for or doing that traditional healthcare, if I can call it that, will miss? Like, what's the difference? What's my life look like as a patient of yours?
Yeah, I think we have the patient onboarded ahead of time before they come in to see us so that we have gathered all their health history. That onboarding call usually takes, probably 30, 40 minutes where they're interviewed by a specialist who gathers all the information from them. And then that information is there available for us when the patient first comes in. We also get in-depth body composition, looking at muscle mass and fat mass, percent body fat, hydration levels, and lab data at a time, 100 plus biomarkers, looking at metabolic health and hormones, vitamins, nutrients, organ health. And that helps us paint a pretty good picture right up front. And so we go over all of that data in that initial consult. And as we interview the person, and they teach us about themselves and their habits, that helps kind of guide us to create that perfect plan. And I think if we are going to really provide this full person, care, that's personalized, it's precision, it's preventative, to really do that, you need to have all that data together, and the plan needs to address each thing that may be off. And at the end of the day, if we're just sticking somebody on a GLP-1 and we don't address the nutrition issues that got them there in the first place, or they're low muscle mass or lower quality muscle, at the end of the day, we didn't really heal that person. We may have even harmed them or pushed them further into their disease process. When they come off the GLP-1, then they gain the weight back, but twice as fast. Just for an example, so I think it's that hour and a half, really getting to know the person, that helps us give that next level care.
Yeah, and I think GLP-1 is a great example. I imagine we both know quite a few people that have gone on it. But as you said, if you don't change the underlying habits or reasons that put you on it to begin with, then it's something you can never come off of. So if your goal is to eventually come off of that, you have to change that. I think that's a great example. So you're talking about concierge medicine almost, which is fascinating. When we do,
Absolutely.
yeah, when we do think about patterns or trends over time, and whether it be labs, body composition, clinical response, what does that tell you that individual maybe biomarkers often miss?
Yeah. So by trending the data over time, watching the muscle mass, the fat mass, looking to make sure we're optimizing certain hormone levels like vitamin D, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone in females, that helps us make sure that we're on the right track. And a lot of times I think folks are put on certain modalities or treatments and they're lost to follow up. And so by not having that continuity and really making sure that you're moving the needle in an effective way, and with very frequent follow-up and reinforcement of the knowledge and making sure that you're getting a result, over time that person, they may not execute it properly, or they may just become disenchanted to where they don't follow the plan, and then you didn't get to make the effect you could have. Yeah.
Interesting. And then when you look at, we both talked about 8 years ago, this wasn't really a thing, and COVID really started accelerating interest. So that's not been that long ago. So how do you decide? I actually had a CEO of a platform tell me they would go to longevity conferences for years now. And he told me, this was maybe 2 years ago, he said the evolution was fascinating. He said you now had, true doctors there, the companies look, feel different. And he compared it maybe 5, 10 years ago. What you would see is, the way he said it, I think, was something like, here's a flower on the west side of the Himalayas that'll cure everything. And now it's a lot more science-based, medicine-based. So you hear about all of these things, peptides, exosomes, which, by the way, I recently read an article that you did, and it was fantastic. And I love the way you broke it down. Biohacking, all of these things are getting such attention. How do you decide, in your clinic, or even things that you're starting to tinker with, how do you decide what's evidence-based, what's noise? How does that work?
Yeah, I think because this is such a new field and it's evolving in real time, I think I mentioned this to you earlier, that the folks that were early adopters are coming in early. You kind of felt like you're on an island by yourself, that things need to change. You're trying to incorporate best practices, but maybe don't have, there is no standard of care yet. But there are some platforms that are being built now that are helping physicians come together and talk about best practices, able to look at the research together, and we're forming those in real time. There's actually a really cool platform that is just recently put together. It's called Longevity Docs, and this has 410 doctors in a group chat where we're all sharing best practices with each other. So we to make sure that this type of medicine is accepted and that we can actually partner with the traditional medical setting and not be looked at like it's voodoo medicine or whatever you want to call it. We really need to bring the physicians together and come up with what that standard looks like. And so certain things that we know are super important, like food is medicine. We know that what we eat affects the microbiome. It's our nutrients. Those types of things I think are pretty standard. We can all agree on that. We know that movement is medicine. The physical activity, testing things like VO2 max, grip strength, balance testing, and power. These things we know are some of the best markers for longevity. And so those things are, those should be the gold standard of what we're using to track people over time. And then when we start to get into hormones and peptides and nutraceuticals, we're finally getting some of the research that we've needed for that and getting the education out there for doctors. So, this is probably one of the most exciting, I think this is the most exciting time in the history of medicine.
I agree. I wish I were 20 years younger to start doing this, and hope I'm not too late.
Oh, Ben, I don't think you're too late. I think you're at that perfect age where you got a long time ahead of you. So we get it dialed in now. You're doing great.
Perfect. Well, I know we mentioned it earlier, but I'll soon be booking a ticket over to your practice. Everything you're doing is just so exciting. Longevity docs. I wrote that down. Now this is fantastic because it's a community of folks that know what they're doing to make sure that things are done right and credibility remains. Are schools teaching this, or medical schools teaching this, or how is
Right.
that working right now?
Right. So, in medical school, we were lucky if we got, had a couple hours. I was fortunate enough to have an interest in exercise physiology, and so I'd focused a little on that. But a lot of this it wasn't taught in the medical schools when I went through. Now, I have heard that there are, even some states that are making it mandatory for them to start incorporating some nutrition counseling or teaching in the medical schools. And so I think that's starting to happen now. As far as like longevity or health optimization type of programs, I know that there's some lifestyle medicine type of programs being developed that focus on the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine, but nothing yet for longevity. However, there are in that group in doctors that I've met recently that are from the Mayo Clinic, from Mount Sinai. It's moving now, and this is, I don't think this is a fad that's going to go away. I think there's enough momentum here that this is going to become its own specialty, or this is just what good medicine should be. And so it's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's absolutely not a fad that's going away. I think, the patients, the consumers are speaking. They're prioritizing wellness and health, true wellness and health, beyond living longer. Combining those two, I think, is extremely powerful. So if they're
Yeah.
not yet teaching it, but it sounds like the trend is that's soon going to happen. You mentioned, some states making it mandatory to teach facets of
Yeah.
it. How, we get a lot of questions in the industry. Of course, we're all in aesthetics, and I want to get into that a little bit because you mentioned the convergence of it. But we get a lot of
Definitely.
questions or a lot of comments, and I know people. I'm sure you get phone calls multiple times a day of folks that see the benefits of that convergence and they want to add longevity, wellness, functional medicine. If you're
Yeah.
not trained in it, and medical school didn't teach you, how do I go about, if I'm a practitioner or owner or whatever it may be, how do I go about learning and making sure that I do a great job in
Great
this
job. Yeah,
subsector of the field.
definitely. And, I think great place to start a lot of times is, take a certification through, if you're a board certified person, you can get in and do like a lifestyle medicine board certification or fellowship. You can get in with, a platform like the Longevity Docs. They have a certification that you can do with them. And I mentioned the A4M, Longevity Docs. There are some great functional medicine platforms too, and that's usually a good place to start. Now, slowly incorporating into your practice, finding a mentor that can work with you. And I think if you like, especially folks that are in the aesthetic realm, if you have been to AmSpa or taken some of the courses there, you can meet folks there and find mentors. I think finding a mentor, someone to help teach you, I think that you can call and say, hey, I have them on, I have one of my patients on this hormone dose. It seems like they're well balanced, but they're still having hot flashes at night, and you're able to, have an expert help train you. Because in medicine, that's how it's always been. You go to residency after medical school, and that's where you really learn how to practice medicine. But there isn't something like that yet. And so I know that there's talks about building, those types of training programs and platforms. And actually, it's something that OneLife is doing. We are building out a new facility, and instead of going to a second location, we decided to triple our square footage, and we can build a little mini type residency program there where our providers go through trainings before they're cut loose. And it's I think if we can have more providers create platforms like that to help train other practitioners, that's how we're going to really standardize this and scale it.
Those are all great tips. Now, I'll call it your
Yeah,
residency program. Is that
yeah,
for team members only, or could not me literally, but let's say that I were
yep, yep.
competent in your field, or could I go in?
Yeah, it's internal right now only. And I think, we'll build that program out and see how it goes. And then, maybe there is an opportunity there to, have folks come on site and train along with our team. And I think that would be amazing if we can get to that point.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, the way you're headed, I would not be surprised at all. But wanted to ask the question because I'm sure if I'm listening, that's the first question that would come to mind. Um,
absolutely.
now,
And we have providers. Sorry to interrupt you, Ben. We have
no,
providers that'll come through and shadow with us for a day, and we're definitely open to that. So, just to kind of see how things are done. And, and I think, yeah, and just getting to the conferences and meeting people there and finding friends and people to be mentors. I think that'd be great.
yeah, and on mentors, I would say, feel free to reach out to folks. I think people tend to get nervous about, well, I don't want to take someone's time. People tend to love it. Just ask the question. I think people, and I've always admired that about you, Ken, of how willingly you are to share everything that you've learned, which is going to make, I think, our entire industry better. So yeah, I would absolutely encourage that mentorship is crucial. I've done it before as well,
Absolutely.
and people are very open to it, more so than I would have thought.
Yeah. Especially in the aesthetic industry. I was so pleasantly surprised as I started to get into aesthetics and learn about aesthetics, just how open everybody was to sharing their knowledge and helping to move the industry forward, and all grow together and learn together. And I think that's one of the reasons that the aesthetic industry has done so well, incorporating some of the wellness in already. And it was, I saw with the GLP-1s how they kind of came in, and I think I said this on a podcast before, but there was, I gave a speech where it was early in the GLP-1s just coming out. I asked how many people are using GLP-1s, and it was maybe a handful of people. And I gave a speech the next year, and the entire room raised their hand. And that's how fast, it was incorporated. I think we're going to see the same thing happening here with hormone replacement. But what I'll say is that, it's really important for us to get proper training out there and best practices so that, we don't see some of the same stuff we did with the GLP-1s where, folks probably got higher doses than they needed and maybe not the education around, the getting proper nutrition and protein intake and making sure we maintained our muscle and all those things. I think it's important for us to get training and make sure that providers don't feel pressured, to incorporate some of these things if they're not ready to. And so, again, that kind of goes back to us building platforms for training for everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, your GLP-1 example is perfect. If that's the only thing you're offering, it's one tool in a toolbox. Whereas what you're doing is you have the entire toolbox, if you will, in treating people holistically. I think that's a fantastic point, and it sounds like the industry's heading that way. So that's also fascinating to hear. You mentioned some of your thoughts around offering aesthetics. It'll bring folks in for wellness. And I mentioned we're getting a lot of those questions. A lot of those people are incorporating pieces of wellness, longevity, functional medicine. Still a lot of questions around how to do that. But I do think it's fascinating, and it speaks to what patients want and where everything's heading. So, thinking aesthetics, the way we define it anyway, as exterior, if you will. So now I look better outside, and you touched on it as well, Ken. That theoretically should mean, okay, the outside looks pretty good, but I still don't feel great. Something's off internally. I want to feel the way I look. So that very naturally goes into wellness, longevity. That's the way we've thought about it as well. And then there are even people talking about, okay, now if you take care of both of those and you're still not okay, then folks are talking about, well, what about the brain? What about the mental side? So you're really starting to incorporate all of this under aesthetics, really. That aesthetics umbrella is, you spoke to it just now, Ken. It's just very open to incorporating these things under that umbrella. How do you see that convergence of aesthetics, wellness, longevity, functional medicine, and what should we expect in the future out of this? How does it look?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to move pretty quick, and I think I always say the best way to take care of the outside actually is to take care of the inside, right? First and foremost, a reflection of what's going on out here is what's going on inside. And so I think a great aesthetic practice would first and foremost, the number one thing they would want to cover to help protect the outside is the inside. So it just makes a lot of sense that aesthetics would incorporate whole body wellness, to get the best aesthetic outcome. So, I think that piece in mental health is a big piece of that. And so, if I really believe that it all goes together. I think, our lifestyle affects our mental health. I think our hormones affect our mental health. And the sooner we, get to folks, the earlier we can get to them, act early, educate people, and give them the tools they need to take care of themselves, the better all of those outcomes are going to be. Treating the whole person, mind, body, soul, I think that's really, where it's headed. And folks, in the aesthetic industry, like I mentioned earlier, there are practitioners that are used to being on the cutting edge, learning new things all the time, trying to keep up with the industry. They, are a lot of us they're trendsetters, and they're welcoming this and are excited about it. And that's how, I think it can be a way that we can really move this type of medicine into the mainstream quickly and help a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. I know you mentioned earlier, Ken, it's the best time to be in medicine. I would say that from a patient, same, but also from what we do for our livelihood here. It's so exciting to be
Definitely.
in this space because we're in other healthcare subsectors as well, and this one. I mean, you can see the team light up when we talk about these things because, these are big changes and they're happening real time and within our lifetimes, which is extremely exciting. Um, on that, I was reading a report maybe a year ago. I think it was that same McKinsey report, and they were talking about
Yeah.
trends, things to look out for. And there are a couple I want to ask you about. One, biomonitoring and wearables. Are there any that you like out there that are useful?
Yeah. I mean, I think they can motivate folks to make change and kind of hold people accountable. And so the Aura Ring, the Whoop, the Apple Watch, all of these can help us instill change in people, motivate them. I can't tell you how many patients we have that, have been able to incorporate changes based on using those wearables. And I think as that data gets better and we can track people in real time and we start to be able to utilize technology and AI and wrap all of that data into, along with the medical record, along with genetic information and all the other biomarkers that we're getting in health history, um, that is going to paint a really beautiful picture that physicians can use to take better care of folks. And so, I think the wearables are great. I think, you know, finally, I think the technology is getting to a place where we're going to be able to really practice precision personalized medicine. So I think that's super cool and exciting. And, I'm really pumped about that. As far as any ones I think are better than others, I think it's really a preference of the person. I have an Aura Ring, a Whoop, and an 8 sleep, and I'm tracking all of it, and it's fun, and then the CGMs or the continuous glucose monitors. I think as an educational experience and using that to learn about how your body responds to this meal or to this food. I can't tell you how many folks that maybe we worked with them for 6 months or a year and they were making great changes, but then we couldn't quite get the A1C down into that optimal range where we wanted. We put the continuous glucose monitor on and they tracked their food and the response in real time, and that educated them further about how their body responds, and they've made changes since then, and that's made a huge difference. And so I think all of these modalities you know can have a great benefit for us.
That's a great rundown. The eight
Yeah.
sleep. I've been researching that one. It looks great. And then the Apple Watch. I just started wearing at night to sleep, and I agree. It motivates me. It also depresses me
Yeah.
as well because it shows me how little sleep I get. And then
Yeah.
James here, he has a Whoop, and it's funny. I remember, and it always happens at like AmSpa MSS. He'll come up to me and he'll say, "Oof, my recovery's like 2% or something like that." So it's
Yeah.
actually fascinating what decisions end up doing from a consequence perspective. And the food thing, I've been reading a lot about that as well, how differently each of us
Yeah.
reacts to food. So being able to have a diet that works well for your body, I think is, maybe something else we can talk about sometime. But I think that part's fascinating as
Yeah.
well.
For
Yeah.
sure. I think that is one thing I think coming down the line here that's going to be really exciting is where, we can start to individualize nutrition to the person. And, we know the microbiome plays a big role in that. We're learning more and more about that and how shifts in, what you're eating can shift the microbiome, and that can affect all kinds of stuff. And so, I think that's going to be really exciting to keep an eye on that too.
Yes,
Definitely.
agree. That'll be a fun one. It's just so important. And the second one I wanted to ask you about is generative
Yep.
AI. Do you see anything? The way this article I think linked it was that with AI, it's becoming just a lot more personalized to a person. And so is there anything, generative AI wise that you're seeing out there, any trends that you're seeing for folks to watch out for? This day and age, you have to ask the AI question.
Definitely. So, I'm keeping a close eye out. There are some different companies that are working really hard at building kind of that all-in-one solution, but not one that's out yet that I know of. But we're really looking forward to that. But like I mentioned earlier, I think we're going to be able to take all that data eventually and compile it together, and it's going to give us an easy snapshot of the patient, that we can use in practice. So, I think also we're going to be able, the patient will be able to pull back up, what you discussed in your meeting, all their data. They'll be able to ask it questions. It'll be able to educate the patient, and that kind of goes back to us helping the patient, really become the captain of their own health ship. They now aren't just relying on the doctor. They can be educated in real time, and that helps them be more of a participant in their health. And it's your health is not out of your control. And I think that's really what this is going to bring to us, which is going to be pretty amazing.
Captain of their own health ship. I love that. You need to trademark that.
Yeah.
That's actually such a great way to put it.
I wish I could take credit for that, but that's a lot of folks use that. But it's actually the primary care doctor. When I was in medical school, was the primary care doctor who was supposed to be the captain of the health ship. Well, nobody that's spending 10 minutes with you a couple times a year can be the captain of your health ship. And so I really believe that we need to empower the patient to take on that role, that they need enough medical education, they need enough information, that they really are able to take care of themselves and know that a lot more of their health is in their control than, we originally thought, and so I think we have to help doctors kind of wrap their head around how things are changing, and that we really need to become that teammate along with the patient. And that's what's going to get us the best result with them.
Such a good point. As you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, what if a personal trainer spent 5 minutes with you and said, good luck? I mean, you could never do anything on your own. And what's worse, what if you only saw them once a year and then you're expected to do things
Right.
on your own? You're probably not going to. Whereas, when they become a partner, you end up somewhat knowing what to do, enough to be dangerous. Could even do workouts as you
Yeah.
travel. So, yeah, that's such a great point. We've talked about a lot of exciting things. What's something maybe in longevity medicine that maybe isn't glamorous, but is very effective? It's overlooked, low hanging fruit. Is there something out there that you don't see in the papers every day?
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the hyperbaric chambers and red light and cold plunges and the wearables and all these things, it's all great, but what really is going to make the biggest impact is focusing on your nutrition, all whole foods, really getting that dialed in. We know the food is medicine. We know that movement is medicine. We know that the body's designed for physical activity. We have to participate in it or we can't be healthy. There's probably no better tool than physical activity, and sleep, stress management, hydration. Those are kind of the big ones. And I think, like you said, it's not glamorous or sexy, but those are the things that have to be pillars. And if those aren't dialed in, or just even one of those is off, I mean, that can lead to a decline in lessen your health span and lead to chronic illness.
That's great. And I think what you just described, and feel free to add on or summarize if you want to, but I think what you just described is what we talked about at the beginning, which is, medicine got really good at extending lifespan, and, now we're extending health span. So I think those things that you mentioned kind of answered that. You mentioned quite a few things. So if I want to start taking this seriously, what are the top three I should do like right now?
I mean, I think the top three, it's tough to pick a top three over. I mean, I think nutrition, physical activity, and sleep. If I could have four, I would throw stress management in there.
Let's do
And
four. Stress management.
four. Yeah, those four, I think, are the big ones for sure.
That's great. That's a great point on stress management. I just read an article on that. You can do everything well if you don't manage that. And I thought, uh-oh. But we'll do what we can.
Yep,
So,
exactly.
Ken,
Do the best you can.
that's right. You're in Palm Beach Gardens. Can people work with you? Do they have to fly to you? Can you work with folks, not physically there? Selfishly, I'm asking for myself as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can. We have folks who do fly in and establish care here, and will see us in person, then fly back, and we can continue that relationship through telemedicine. Um, in certain states, we can see patients out of state through telemedicine. Sometimes we need them to go get a physical done by another provider. But yep, we can definitely see folks. I encourage anybody who wants to be a patient to reach out. And if we're unable to treat you or have you become a patient with us, like I said, we have a network of longevity physicians around the country that we can, refer you to somebody who's really great. But yep, we can point you in the right direction if we can't help, but most likely we'd love to see you.
And what is the best way to reach out if I want to reach out? How do I get a hold of you or your
Absolutely.
team?
Yeah, so you could call us. Our number is 561-327-9393, or you could email us at patientcare@olhp.com, or visit us at our website, which is onelifehealthandperformance.com or olhp.com. And then you can find me on Instagram. I'm Dr. Palm Beach. I have my beautiful, amazing wife and her marketing brain to thank for that, but it's dr.palmbeach. And you can find me on Instagram there.
All right. So about 6 ways to get a hold of you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And
Absolutely.
that is a great name. Tiffany did a great job on that one. I thought that from the beginning. I was like, oh, I bet that gets searched a lot from folks wanting that and figuring out where to go. Dr. Palm Beach. I love it. Ken, I have one more question, but before I ask it, is there anything that we didn't talk about that's top of mind that you want to mention?
Yeah, I think I'm really excited about, the shift that's happening. I think, the biggest, opportunity we have now is to partner with the doctors around us and to start to try to educate, all doctors, the family physicians, internists, OBGYN, cardiology, our surgeons. If we can start to educate those folks about longevity medicine, and what we're able to do for preventing disease and extending health span, and partner with them. I think when I look back at what happened with hormone replacement, and the evidence was there all along, and doctors they almost had like this cult following where, you just heard it in medical school that it causes cancer. And then we didn't act or try to do anything about that. It took years and years and years to finally come around on that. And so I think, we have enough momentum now. I think these shifts are happening, and it's up to us as providers to get out there and educate people. And then too, our patients, at the end of the day, if we can encourage our patients to spread the word to all of their friends and family, and help them know that there's ways for us to prevent chronic disease in folks, that we have the knowledge, we have the tools now, and we can make a huge impact. That's what's going to spread the word and help us, with preventing chronic disease in folks, and help alleviate some of the suffering that is unnecessary that's happening right now. So it's up to us as the providers and as the patients, and we're what's going to drive that innovation forward.
That is fantastic. That got me excited. And I mean, even today, just our chat right as we were logging on, one of the things you touched on is I was one of the ones that asked, "Hey, hormone replacement, testosterone, does it cause cancer?" And as you said, it's we need to educate folks out there so that they know and they know the tools available to them. And then I also love what you said around once you do get educated, it's also up to us, meaning myself, beyond you, to give some information to folks around. Hey, this is actually what's possible. I don't know how to do it, but call Dr. Ken Winnard, and he does know.
Absolutely.
So I love the way you put
Yeah.
that. Thank you. Final question.
You're so
So,
welcome.
oh, if you have a
Yeah.
crystal ball, and I'm sure you have it on there somewhere on your desk, how do you
Yeah.
see aesthetics, wellness, longevity, maybe even go beyond that? How do you see these subsectors evolving the next 3, 5, 10 years?
I mean, my dream and hope is that, all of medicine can make a shift towards longevity and focusing on true prevention and increasing health span. And, but it might end up being two different lanes for a long time where we have a sick care model and now we have this, and I don't know exactly what to call it, but let's just call it a well care model. And they run parallel to each other and they feed each other and work together. And a dream, would be that we were accepting of both sides and we can work together to get the best patient outcomes. So, I hope that, there's platforms out there that they're gaining a lot of traction and it's consumer driven. And so, that's not going to change now. The cat's out of the bag and that's going to happen. So I hope that we can work together and, hopefully over the next 3 years that starts to happen and then it just blossoms from there.
That's great. I agree with your dream, and I think your dream will come true. I think, anytime it's driven by the market, I think, the sick care model, I think you said, and the well care model or wellness care model, they'll have to work together. I think that's what we all want as patients and consumers as well. So it's great to hear you say that. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us.
Absolutely. And Ben, thank you so much for having us. And if I could say one more thing before we part ways, we've had such an amazing experience with Skytale, and anybody thinking about or needing a partner to help them with growth in business development and managing finances, I think one thing that's really helped OneLife was getting involved with Skytale, and we're very grateful for you guys. And if anybody was, thinking about incorporating with someone like that, I can't recommend Skytale enough.
Ken, thank you so much for saying that. That means the world to us. And you, Tiffany, and the entire team have been such great partners, and we're extremely honored to work alongside you and help you in every way that we can, and have been just so honored to be next to you through all of your success that you've created, and what you're doing for patients and for other doctors and practitioners in the space in general. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Ben.
All right.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed the episode with Dr. Ken Winnard, and please join us next time. Thank you.